welcome. So in some of the myths and the distortions and some of the things that go wrong. And so I am so honored and a little bit intimidated to be here with these two like absolute literary gods, Merve Emre, who is a professor of creative writing and criticism at Wesleyan College. And she's won a ton of awards. She's written a lot of books. We have one of them here. And
You have two of them.
Oh, two of them, sorry.
One is appropriately called What's Your Type?
And I first came across Merve through her beautiful articles in The New Yorker and then Twitter. And so she is now, the first one is on Useless Pursuits, which is a hilarious title. I absolutely love it. I'm so excited. So hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. We're also here with Agnes Callard, who I have been a fan of on Twitter for a really long time as well. And
it's my fault that Agnes's books are not here because apparently the book on anger sold out before Christmas. So in the entire state of New York, there is none to be had.
And she is a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago and also written a ton of books, including one on aspiration and one on anger. Also won a ton of awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, and also writes for The New Yorker. And I mean, both Merve and I write for all the top publications in the world. So I am thrilled to be here with you both. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us tonight. Thank you. Thank you for organizing. She's run off.
Thanks,
She's run off. She's run off. Thank you. Thank you for
I
organizing.
was trying to sneak away before the debunking the myths of love game.
So first, I would love to talk a little bit about your thinking about love. Like, what is this crazy thing called love? Merve? Tell us a little bit about.
Well, perhaps I could tell a story about how I came to write this book, Love and Other Useless Pursuits. When I was in graduate school, I was very, very, very close with one of my advisors who passed away while I was working on my dissertation. And he was in the middle of finishing a book called Queer Natures, Queer Mythologies. Chapter on Charles Darwin and on Charlem with love. So to paraphrase my former advisor's argument, his name is Sam C. Sam argued that love was a problem for Darwin because love made nothing happen in the world. It had no necessary or definitive end. It had no telos or logic that it had to follow. And this is a problem for a thinker who is so preoccupied with evolution, with utility, and with the ends of everything, from our appearance to our emotions. And so for Sam, love was, for Darwin, a useless pursuit. And so then the question was, how did we think about it? If we couldn't think about it in terms of its usefulness, if we couldn't think about it in terms of its value or its utility, think about it. And I was asked to deliver a sort of posthumous address when this book, Queer Natures, Queer Mythologies, came out. And so I wrote about how, what is that? I wrote about how this uselessness actually helped us see a very particular tradition of art making that also stressed art as being useless, i.e. something that you couldn't value according to the standards of valuation of the market, but that you could think of as bringing you very particular kinds of pleasures, very particular kinds of pains, and as something that could truly rewire the way that you thought about yourself and your relationship to others. It could make you capable of immense kindness. It could prompt immense cruelty. It could take you address, and I should say I'm not an emotional writer at all. I'm a very pragmatic writer, and I'm a very slow writer too. But as I was writing this, I was both like writing really fast and weeping the whole time that I was writing it. And I thought nothing has ever come so easily, and nothing has ever been so hard, which means there must be something here. And I thought I need to write a whole book about this. And I started by teaching a class at Wesleyan called Love and Other Useless Pursuits. And the reason the title of the book is what it is, it's because my students were like, we would definitely buy a book with this title. And I was like, great, let me tell my publisher and we can call it that. And as I started teaching that class, it started with the symposium, which I'm assuming many of you read for today. It included period, Goethe's Elective Affinities, which some of you might have read for today, Proust, Woolf, James Baldwin, Roland Barthes, and it ended with Gillian Rose's unbelievable book on love. And as I was teaching this class, I realized I'd never seen students attach to texts in the way that they attach to these texts. And I thought, you know what? There's a relationship here between the so-called uselessness of love and the so-called uselessness that many people like to attribute to what I do, which is teach literature. And I thought, what if you could construct a canon of love that was also a canon of the kinds of works that could prompt people to really read? What would that canon look like? What would its forms be? What would its ideas be? What would its motivation be? And how could we use this idea about the uselessness of love to tell us about the uselessness, but also the great pleasure and the great pain that literature. I don't know if that answers your question, what is this great thing called love? But maybe from that narration, one thing that I could propose is that it is a useless emotion, i.e., it will absolutely repel all of our attempts to describe it in utilitarian terms, and it has to be described using another vocabulary, a vocabulary of art.
Brilliant. So when can we read this book?
Okay, calm down. I mean, I think I'm supposed to hand it in September 1st, 2025.
Oh, okay.
And so, I mean, some of it is already written, and actually a lot of the pieces that I've been writing for The New Yorker have been about this. I did a long piece on James Joyce's Ulysses, which is reading that as a novel that is primarily interested in the different kinds of love that exist in the world, and particularly in what it means, what conjugal love means, what it means to love within a marriage. I'm actually doing a trilogy on marriage right now for the New York Review of Books. The first piece is on Anatomy of a Fall, which some of you might have seen, yes, which my husband is terrified to watch with me. Actually, I was on the phone with my editor yesterday, and my husband was kind of bothering me, and my editor he was on speakerphone, and he goes, "Just push him out a window already. What are you doing?" So a lot of what I've been thinking about has been, circling this issue, including a piece I did on Simone de Beauvoir and her lost novel, The Inseparables, which you know, and you've thought about this a lot in the context of Beauvoir. So
Yeah. Thanks, Merve.
Of course.
Agnes, could you share with us a little bit about where your interest in love comes from?
Maybe I've gotten backed into thinking about love. It's not a topic in love. That is, if you look at the philosophical sort of, the literature, what's out in journals, what you'll find is a bunch of stuff on relationships where the author of the piece is very, very careful to make clear that this includes, family and friends and romance and all kinds of different relationships. Or you might find stuff on sexual consent. If it's going to be about sex, it's going to be about sexual consent. Those two topics are the topics of, it's sort of like they're the safe topics. You can talk about romantic relationships as long as it's the same conversation as parent-child, or you can talk about sexual consent, and that's it. And so I think I am in some way, I'm motivated by the conversations around me, and so I just wouldn't have thought about it except, I think it all started, I don't know, years ago when my marriage broke up and I fell in love with someone and I felt the need to explain this phenomenon. And I had to talk where I'm like, this is love. Never having thought about it really before. I mean, I had taught the symposium, but I had like a couple days to come up with, and I'm like, here's a passage from my favorite novel, and here's this thing from Plato's Symposium, and here's me trying to talk through my life. And that was like my first stab. And then I keep doing more stabs at it. And I think as I've done it, I keep coming up against three problems, like three things that are really hard to understand. The first one and the main one and the one that is thematized most directly inside the symposium is sort of like, if we ask, what are you looking for in a romantic partner? On the one hand, we're inclined to say, I want somebody who will be attached to me, who will stick with me through thick and thin, who won't leave me, who won't betray me, who will, be with me no matter what, no matter how I change. Attachment. But then we also say, well, I want someone who appreciates me, who appreciates my good qualities, who cares that I have those qualities, who sees me as being especially awesome in at least some ways, and who in effect sees me as good somehow. Let's call that rationality, okay? I'm gonna call it that just because such a person has reasons for wanting you. The problem with rationality is that it cuts against attachment. Because say there's 100 reasons why my husband loves me, right? So my amazing fashion sense and my philosophical ability, well, he could find someone that has even better fashion sense and even better at philosophy, and then he'd be rationally required to prefer her over me. I should be like, you guys go, because all of you are even better to her, insofar as reality requirement, even I couldn't object, right? So I'm like, well, no, I also care about the attachment thing. What's the attachment? It's well, I'll stick with you through thick and thin, no matter what, no matter what you suck, I'll stay by you. And so this, for me, is one of the deep paradoxes about love, is that we want rationality and we want both those things at the same time. And maybe the compromise we make is that we go a little bit more for the rationality part in the early stage of the relationship, where I'm hunting, right? When I'm hunting for who to love, I want a especially good person. But then we settle down and now we're glued to each other. Aristophanes in the Symposium has this wonderful image of what people really want is to fuse with their beloved, to be literally one body, because then they can't leave you. So Aristophanes goes all in on attachment, right? Goes all in on rationality. He's like, love is wanting to have the good forever. No, look, what you care about is having whatever those goods are the things that you're fundamentally attracted to. I'm sure we'll talk more about this. I won't go into more detail now. Anyway, that's problem number one, the problem of rational attachment. Problem number two, jealousy. The fact that people get jealous in connection to love. So I think that's super, super mysterious. It's so familiar to us. It's so natural that people are getting jealous in the context of love that we don't find it surprising, but we should find it surprising. It's just we've been gaslit into thinking that's normal, but it's not normal. It's incredibly weird. So, I'll tell you a story. When I was, when my oldest son was 4, and we told him he was gonna have a sibling. We were in the car. He was in the back, and he broke down just sobbing, as though we'd broken his heart, and his tears were streaming down the face. It was the worst news in his life. He was so beside himself with sadness, with rage, with betrayal. And we would say things well, Abe, do you do you think we're not gonna love you? He's like, no, I just don't want you to love another child. And isn't that an adorable little story about how a little boy reacted when his parents broke the fundamental contract that he thought was there, which is that you're not gonna have some other kid, that you love alongside me. I thought I was the one, But now when a kid does that, we're adorable, but yeah, you're gonna have to make room for your sibling and deal, right? When a full-grown adult says those same things, we're oh no, she or he's being very reasonable, How could you love them if you love someone else? Where is that logic when I have a second child? How can you love the first one if you have? How can you love your one best friend if you have? Somehow this logic, we find it incredibly compelling.
Your second child do?
When
you learned about
that he's gonna have
no, I have a point. What did the second child do?
He was delighted.
Right.
As long as it was a
Right.
boy, which
Right.
it was, luckily.
Right. I have these 2 kids too. I have the older one who cannot stand the idea that there's another, and I have the younger who every time I say I love you, he says, but you also love Aiden too.
Right.
I'm endlessly fascinated. I'm like, why is one of you like totally okay with
Because
this?
there's an
and the
implied
other one-
contract,
because
I think,
there's
with
an
the
implied-
first.
Right.
You know,
Right,
they're
right.
like,
Right.
there's just like,
Right.
look, I thought we had a tacit agreement here that like you're going to be my only mom and I'm going to be your only kid,
Right.
and we have to spell it out. But and then by the time the second kid comes around,
Yeah.
it's like, okay.
No, the second one, the contract is about sharing, right? So then
Exactly.
when I don't bring up the second one, it's always like, no, remember, you are obligated to never let you. Sorry. Anyway, just
Yeah.
wondering. I was wondering.
So problem number 3 is breakups. So breakups are really hard. That's weird. That's another thing that we should be more weirded out than we are. So a big part of your job as a philosopher is to tell people when they should be more weirded out by something than they are. Reality is actually very, very strange, and we're like the frog being boiled in the water slowly. Like we think it's normal that breakups are so hard, but like if you had a friend and they were at the outside of a restaurant and they were banging on the door of the restaurant, and you come to them and you're like, oh, this restaurant's closed. And they're like, but I have to go to this restaurant. And you're like, but like, what about all the other restaurants on the block? Like, there's other ones that are open. And they're like, no, I have to go to this one. This is the only one I can go to. And you're like, what? Is the food here so amazing? And they're like, no, it's terrible. I hate it. That's what we do with breakups, right? They're like, I can't stop calling my ex. I hate him. And no one else could ever possibly be for me. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. If somebody behaves that way about any other kind of desire, we would think there was something like deeply wrong with them. And so like love is a place where we've normalized completely insane behavior. And I'm just fascinated by that. So I'm fascinated by these 3 puzzles about love. And I'm just finishing up a book right now. And I'm one of the chapters of my book is about the Socratic theory of love, which is crazy. None of you are going to buy it, but you know, sort of the framework in which I put forward this theory is like, yes, okay, this theory is crazy. Maybe we'll get into it a little bit, but the thing is, your lives are crazy. So you know, maybe this is actually more sane. It just looks nuts to you because you've gotten used to like a status quo where people have told you like, this is how it's supposed to go. You're supposed to be banging on the doors of closed restaurants.
Okay, well, on that note, why don't we get into some of the thing on some closed doors of restaurants? And I have a hat here, actual hat, with some love cliches in there that we were brainstorming. So I was thinking, I mean, love cliches, and they purport to tell us something true about the world, but either they tend to end up being so bland and only relevant sometimes that, you know, they tend to become meaningless. And often they kind of cloud our understanding of what love is, or the nuances and the intricacies of love. So we are going to dive into some of those now. Merve, could I ask you to pick one out of the hat?
Happy to. Let's see. Oops.
Or you can choose which one.
I true love is about finding your soulmate who will complete you. So am I supposed to discuss?
Yeah.
Well, I actually want to jump off of something that Agnes said, and which I'm assuming you all have read, which is Aristophanes' speech in the symposium. And for those of you who haven't read it, let me just refresh momentarily. You know, Aristophanes says that once upon a time, people were these wonderfully round, globular entities with do they have 4 legs, 4 arms, 2 faces, and they get around everywhere by form or in their total form. They are so threatening to the gods that Zeus orders them to be cleaved in half. And so once human beings are cleaved in half, Zeus has, I think it's Hephaestus, or is it Hephaestus or Ares? It's Hephaestus, stretch their skin to cover the wound and rearrange their genitals so that they are now on the front as opposed to on the side or on the back or wherever it was that they were initially. And Aristophanes says that human beings are marked by this lack. and he doesn't exactly say that, Jacques Lacan says it in his reading of the symposium, but that human beings are forever marked by this lack, by this wound, by this absence. And they spend the rest of their lives wandering around, trying to find the person who will make them feel complete. And as Agnes put it, when they find each other, they want nothing more than to fuse with each other, but they can't, right? You cannot fuse with another person. And Martha Nussbaum, in her great reading of the symposium, says, isn't it funny that we take these little bobs and bits and stick them into other people's bobs and bits? And we think that that's somehow an expression of love. Talk about making something weird, right? It's like, sex is weird, right? And this is how we figure out it's weird, because we think about ourselves as cloven beings that are trying to stick our hanging things into each other's empty things, right? And so the idea that the soulmate makes you complete is always a kind of false promise, because you can never feel, according to Aristophanes, as complete as you want to feel. You can never fuse. You can never get back to the prelapsarian state before cut in half. Okay. So how do we think about Aristophanes' speech today? I mean, the first thing that we should think of is Aristophanes was a writer of comedies. This is supposed to be funny. And the idea of what we do to attach to other people, to fuse to other people, is actually, I think, supposed to be the comic counterpart to our rationality. So the idea that sometimes you will do anything to be close to a person, or the idea that sometimes there's no amount of closeness that feels sufficient, is, I think, not supposed to be tragic, but in fact, comic. So that's one thing that we can think about. The second thing that we can think about is the idea of completion. I don't know that there's anyone who ever feels complete. If there is, I would very much like to meet that person. And I think the idea of completion is such a dangerous fiction, and one that gets particularly dangerous when you can't see the comedic side of it. When you can. So to me, this is a really unhelpful, dangerous cliche that true love is about finding your soulmate who will complete you. And maybe the third thing that I will say is that it does presuppose that there's already some kind of determination that has happened. That person is out there, and all you need to do is seek and ye shall find. And if you don't, well, too bad. But I think I think that there's something truly unimaginative about that. I think a massive part of love, and to get back a little bit to the kind of aesthetic language that I was insisting we use to think about it, a massive part of love is its strangeness, right? It's coming into contact with someone who makes you feel strange to yourself. All of a sudden you are, and I think that can happen over and over and over again. And the one that I actually put back was that you can't be in love with two people at one time, but I probably would have landed on a similar place, which is that strangeness can happen over and over and over again. Does that mean you are always complete? Does that mean you have been completed and then all of a sudden you've become incomplete and now you need to be recompleted? Or does it just mean that, like reading art that thrills us and makes us see the world in some kind of strange and new way, we like coming into contact with that strangeness. We like feeling like we don't know who we are, or that we see ourselves anew, and we chase that lack. We love that lack. We poke that wound. And we can never be those lovely little balls rolling around threatening the gods again. So that's my response to that cliche. Is Agnes pulling another one out of the hat, or do we debate these cliches?
Well,
how do we do it?
I have some stuff to say about this one.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the next. Suddenly now, hearing you talk about Aristotle's speech, I'm thinking, oh, this is so good for your book, because I feel like Aristophanes' speech, I classify it with like the story of the Tower of Babel, like these ancient stories in which humans get uppity, and so gods do something to make sure that we won't become gods. And so in a way, what they do is they distract us, right? So we're now focused on this useless pursuit, namely one another, right? And that it's a story of how love became a useless pursuit. It was a punishment from the gods for rolling around too fast and scaring, but we won't do that or something like that. I guess I do think that that's, whether we see it as comic or tragic, I do see some tragedy in Aristophanes' speech. yes, he was a comic writer, but Plato wrote this. Plato wrote it in the face of the fact that Aristophanes is one enemy, right?
Yeah.
In a certain sense. I mean, Aristophanes is our first source on Socrates. Clouds. And Plato knows this. Plato knows he's entering the scene as somebody who writes about Socrates after Aristophanes, who's just made fun of him relentlessly, but also maybe made him into Socrates, made him into a public figure. Sort of thing. All right, so the question of like, what is Plato doing in putting a bunch of words in the mouth of Aristophanes, a bunch of tragic words in the mouth of a comic poet? Yes, I agree that there's some comic stuff there, but it is kind of, there's something heartfelt, there's something tragic and sad about this loneliness of wanting to go back to our old condition. And then then Socrates shows up and he makes this kind of the first subtweet maybe or something. He has this reference back to Aristotle. He's like, I heard once a speech, I can't remember when, about how love is of another half, but actually I think love is not of a half or a whole, but of the good. And then he gives that, And so we're having this like contrast between the idea that love is a useless pursuit, which is the Aristophatic idea, and a different idea. I think Plato thinks love is a useful pursuit. It's a way of aiming towards the good. And so it's super interesting, like foil for your book. But I want to, I kind of just want to go back to this myth and this story, because it occurred to me now that there's a fourth problem about love from what you were saying, which is another way to hear the story of Aristophanes. So often, stories about love are stories about how the beginning of something haunts the whole rest of it, right? So if you see the movie May, December, great movie, and that's what that movie is about. It's about a romance that begins between like a 30-something-year-old woman and like a 12 or 13-year-old in the tabloids, and then we see throughout literature and the philosophy that deigns to deal with love, that somehow there's this beginning, there's this original condition, and it structures all this stuff that we're doing later. And even when we're, re-encountering the strangeness of the other in all these ways, there's like an element of repetition to it, which is the beginning recurring. And maybe in some way this is also Freud's thought, that we are working out, and I think we get to talk about this with Esther later, because it's one of my big questions for her, that we are sort of working out something that is in us from a very long time in our past. And I want to put this on the table because I find it incredibly depressing, this thought, like this problem number 4, being haunted by the beginning. Clearly there's some truth here, because we keep telling the story over and over again, but either the beginnings of my relationship, which were somewhat traumatic, or my childhood, I find that very depressing. And I suppose I'm not so tolerant of that kind of uselessness. Like I want my love to be going somewhere. I want to become I want to be improving. Like I want usefulness. Anyway, so I just thought I'd bring that out as like maybe a tension between how we're thinking about this.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is you frame those 3 things or 4 things as problems, and I would not. I would say that these are the conditions under which the best kinds of drama arise. These are the conditions that the greatest novels use to explore things like fate and free will, or fantasy and reality. And in fact, I think there's something wonderfully productive about not going anywhere. I think there's something wonderful, because these are hard questions. And I actually think it's good to keep treading the same ground, because I think it simply activates your thought, which is in and of itself, to me, something on the one hand useful and on the other hand useless, if that makes sense. But actually, I kind of want to go back to May, December, because I think that links up with something else that we've been talking about, which is, yes, that relationship is haunted by its beginning, but it's also haunted by Natalie Portman. So it's haunted, and this is a kind of haunting that I think a great deal of literature about love also experiences. The person who wants to come in and read a story, and they want to embody that story in their own way, right? Natalie Portman wants to play, or Natalie Portman's character wants to play Juliette Moore's character. And she wants to know how to do it, and she wants to kind of close read her to figure out how to do it. Stand next to her in the mirror while she puts on her blush. I sleep with the man that she has slept with. And one of the wonderful realizations of that film is that in the film, Natalie Portman's character is supposed to be a terrible actress. When you actually see her acting at the end, she's a lifetime original caliber actress. She is not Natalie Portman, right? So this is another kind of haunting that I'm interested in, which is the way that we as readers haunt texts that are bad examples or entirely singular in their logic, the way that we pick up these cultural scripts and we want to be haunted by them just as we haunt them too. And there's probably no better example of this than one of the books you were asked to read for tonight, which is Madame Bovary. On the one hand, everybody who reads Madame Bovary thinks, well, Emma's a terrible reader of novels. You should not read novels the way that Emma reads novels. On the other hand, listens to a song and thinks, that's about me. It's speaking to me. Or reads a novel and thinks, this is exactly like my life. Or watches Fleabag and thinks, should I sleep with a hot priest or not, right? So I am endlessly interested in this idea of us haunting the scenes of love and the scenes of love haunting us back. And that not being, not having to be useful. But it can, in fact, be useless because it keeps us negotiating what our relationship as living, breathing people in the here and now is to the representations that we have to try to understand the world. And that's why you should major in English. No, I'm joking. That's why the humanities are. No. But yeah. So the concept of haunting. I mean, I want to think about that concept with you.
I do too, but I feel like I should pull another thing. Get through any cliches. So what I'm just trying to integrate my response with a cliche.
Good. Okay. We are haunted by these cliches.
I'm gonna pick between two. Okay, that's good. I'm gonna pick Love Is All You Need. Okay. Love Is All You Need. Is that true? I think that the sense in which love is all you need is true is the sense in which anger is all you need. Namely, when you're super angry, you don't care about anything else. You don't care that you're hungry, that you're cold, you're consumed by anger. Everything about your mind is like a laser that points towards revenge, basically. But you won't call it revenge. You'll call it like justice or accountability or like, expressing how I feel or whatever. You'll have some much nicer word for it, but that's what it will be. And anger, it's totalizing and it fully organizes your point of view. And I do think that love, at least at times, is like that. Falling in love is like that. One experience that I remember about falling in love is that I kept having, this sounds crazy when I say it, but to me at the time it made sense, that the world was kept conspiring to make things work out perfectly for me. Like if I was hungry and I wanted a croissant, there would be a croissant. Like I was in some kind of romantic comedy or something, but it's my actual life. So I felt like I had this like interpretive stance where I'm like, everything is just falling into place like perfectly. And love is ruling everything. And it's like, so I had that kind of stance from the point of view of love. I have this thought, love is all you need. Now, obviously it's not true. In the sense, standing outside me, okay, if you're like a sane person looking at me, you were probably, at the time, thinking, like, she's exploding her life. She's married. Kids, like, love is definitely not all that she needs. She needs like a lot of other things to keep her job, and she needs, and so, but I think the same thing is true of anger. Namely that it's not true, but it appears to the person in it. It's totalizing of your point of view. And somehow being in those states that totalize your point of view, in which you have a kind of artificial clarity and a kind of faux knowledge, you feel very alive. And that is, it is mysterious to me. Why that feels so alive, because it's a form of delusion too, but it does. I did not do a good job integrating this into responding to you.
I can respond to this though.
Okay,
I can respond to this, which is, I completely recognize and agree with the state that you are describing, the totalizing state. It is absolutely a state that I don't want and feel that I don't need. The totalizing state of love being something that you need, or the very foreign to me, because when I'm in that state, I think all I want is to be free of this. And at the same time that one feels intensely alive, one also feels shattered, right? Completely shattered. And Anna and I were talking about this earlier, that shattering can open onto a peculiar kind of freedom, which is that you can make yourself up again. You can try to pull yourself back together, but you can do it with a kind of consciousness of yourself as almost a fictional character. And I don't need that. I don't want it. But there are times when it is supremely interesting to go through. And I appreciate that. What you were saying about months appearing. I'm hungry. I didn't eat dinner. I wish I was. Another book that we asked you guys to read is Goethe's Elective Affinities. And with all due respect to you, Agnes, the way you describe that, you sound like one of the buffoons in Goethe's Elective Affinities, right? These people who are like, well, I love this woman, and look, the glass that I'm drinking from is monogrammed with her initials. Like, it must be a sign, right? And I'm so interested in what the benefits of that kind of totalizing practice of reading, let's say, are, and what the drawbacks of it are too. Because looking at it from the outside, you're like, these people are ridiculous. Where is their rationality? Yeah, surely absolutely. They should know that the monogrammed glass doesn't stand for anything related to this woman. And, what are the chances of anybody's initials being on that, right? Yes. But at the same time, you can't pull yourself out and become, I actually think, quite boring in a way. And this is why I don't like that state, because I think it makes you bored. I think it makes you a particularly paranoid kind of reader, and it makes you a flat one, or a kind of one or two-dimensional one, which is why that novel fascinates me, because it's about these essentially two-dimensional characters running around, seeing signs everywhere, making that art together in tribute to these signs, and then all just kind of dying. And there's a uselessness to that in what they're doing, but it's actually quite useful for us, because we read it and we think, okay, I want to find a way to inhabit that state, but to inhabit it such that I can be buffered from its most destructive forces. And maybe this gets back to what you were saying. How do I balance, although it's a slightly different set of terms, how do I balance reason with desire? How do I balance rationality with attachment? And what does time have to do with this? If I just wait it out long enough, will this fade?
Yeah. So I absolutely don't think like when we say, this is all you need, that's just from inside the point of view. And I wasn't meaning to affirm it from the outside. Like, it's a thing that happens to you, not a thing that you do. But I agree that it doesn't make you especially interesting to other people. But I do think it's interesting to think about why you get into that state. And yes, I think it has something to do with being a reader, but I think we have to generalize a little bit. One thing that we sometimes do with things in our lives is interpret. Interpretation is the thing we do sometimes. So we can do it with the work of literature.
All the time.
All the time. Well, no, I think not all the time, actually. But a lot of the time, let's say, okay? With the work of literature, with some monogram initials. And so you might ask, when do we do it? When do we do interpretation? When do we not do it? Like right now, I'm not like, but why, is that person sitting there? Or like, why is Merve wearing those cool shoes? Or I'm like, what is the meaning of it? I'm not. I'm just like, that's the way it is. So a lot of our life is just that's the way it is. But then sometimes we're like what's behind that? What's the meaning of it? Okay. So I think that sometimes we have an encounter with something, and the immediate encounter is insufficient. We're just like, you read a novel, and you're just like, I had this encounter, but it's not enough. I need more. What's going on here? What more can I start doing interpretation? What is the meaning of this? And I think, novelists are pretty clearly trying to lure us into this interpretation trap. And I fall into it. I'm not saying it's bad. It's like, it's a thing. They want us to do it. They want us to think there's something more. And we do think it, and then we produce interpretive texts. And I think we also do this with our lives sometimes. Sometimes something happens to you, an event, and it like smacks you in the face, and your encounter with the reality of the event strikes you as insufficient. And so you start interpreting. And I think this happens in an incredible amount in like bad romance. So if you've ever been in a bad romance, like in a kind of relationship that won't end, like you will find yourself doing an incredible amount of textual analysis of like, look at these emails and the series of them, you know, look at how the language changed between them. You bring them into interpretation, just for the same reason that the critic is driven to interpret the novel or the poem, which is that the immediate encounter feels insufficient. And so I think, I think when you're on the outside of this and you see people doing it, they look crazed to you. I think critics sometimes look crazed.
Oh, I agree.
You know, people are like, look, I just read Madame Bovary, fun story. What are you going on about? You know, and this idea of like, no, there's this hidden meaning that I haven't gotten to yet. Like, why, you know, why does he make this scene in this particular way? There's more to be found. I need to dig. So yeah, I think that when this experience hits you, precisely because you don't choose it and you don't control it, maybe the kind of interpretative overdrive is actually it's like an attempt for your agency to assert itself when you feel very powerless.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's also interesting to think about how this aligns with the way people think about making judgments of works of art, right? So there are people who would say, when you see something that you like, you just like it. When I call something beautiful, I can't attach a set of concepts to why I find it beautiful. I might be able to, and that's what I do as a critic all the time, but actually those concepts have no logical relationship to my judgment of beauty.
Right.
The same way that concepts have no logical relationship to falling in love. My husband is tall, dark, and handsome, but that is not why I love him.
I also want to bring it.
Yeah, sorry.
She does.
Should I call another one of these, or do you want to stop? Do you want to go?
I have a question. Just I wanted to bring it back to Madame Bovary for a minute. And Emma, I mean, both of these cliches, love is all you need, and you know, soulmates, we're looking for a soulmate who completes us. It reminds me of what Emma was looking for in Madame Bovary. She'd read all these romance novels. She was looking for this beautiful, harmonious ideal, but the reality of her marriage, which was good enough, but it just didn't, you know, capture her whole being in a way that, you know, love, you were talking about, love does consume you. The marriage didn't consume her. And so she was trying to bridge this gap. And there's a name for it, right? The Madame Bovary syndrome, or the romantic malady, I think. It's where you collapse in this gap of unhappiness because you're forever trying to reach for this soulmate ideal that you can never achieve. And so I think that's one of the ways that these cliches can be hugely dangerous.
Well, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but Emma's downfall is not just love or romance or adultery, but it's the desire for culture, and it's her social aspirations. She doesn't want to be some country bumpkin. She wants to go to Paris. She wants to be married to a man who can talk to her about literature and about art. I mean, have you ever had this? You date someone whose family is really great because they, like, the person themselves is like whatever, but the family is great and they go to great museum openings and they publish great books, and you're like, I love this family, because what you love or you're watching to is a scene and cultural production. And one of my favorite, Emma's trying to decide whether or not to go riding with the man she will have the first affair with. And Charles is like, he'll give you a horse, will be it. And she's like, no. She's really trying to control her impulses. And Charles says, you can buy a new riding habit. And Lydia Davis's translation says wonderfully, the riding habit decided her. So it's about getting the riding habit. It's about accessing culture. It's about being a particular kind of person. And the adultery, the romance, the love is in some ways the vehicle. I mean, it's part of it, it's bound up with it, but it's not all of it. And I think this kind of gets back to what we were talking about, you know, to what extent can you attach concepts to the feeling? Concepts, right? Intensify or deflate the feeling that you have. That's the kind of Madame Bovary problem, or that's the problem as it affects us, right? Like if I am attracted to someone or if I love someone, does their social status matter? Does their cultural status matter? Do their political beliefs matter? Insofar as I can articulate these things, how do they affect whatever it is I'm feeling? And I don't think any of us would say that they don't matter at all. I mean, maybe some people would say that, but I think that they're important. The question is always, how do we articulate how they're important or what they're important for? So that's why Madame Bovary is to me fascinating, because it's about this interlocking of culture and emotion.
I want to ask a question about Saltburn, if that's
Oh, I love it. I had a totally, right? Because how many people have seen Saltburn? Okay. Yeah. So Saltburn is set at Oxford is it in the early 2000s, mid 2010, 2012, something like that. And there's a young boy who's from kind of totally normal middle-class family who develops an attachment to another student who's a member of the aristocracy, of the English aristocracy. And it's very hard and of course the guy he has the crush on is very kind of conventionally handsome. Those of you who've seen Euphoria, he plays the closeted boyfriend in Euphoria, very conventionally handsome. But this is the question that film really asks: is how do you disentangle someone's cultural status, social status? How do you disentangle the way all of those things have formed their habitus, their way of being in the world, their feelings toward them? And how do you tell and what is much, much, much deeper than that? And are those even important differentiations to make? That movie goes off the rails. It has a real third act problem, but that's what it's asking with its initial setup: is how much of this is about who his family is, where he comes from, his money, his way of lighting his cigarettes, and how much of it is about him insofar as he can be separated from any of those things.
Any comments, Agnes, or should we move to the next one?
Should I pick? You want to pick?
Let's move on and you go ahead.
Okay. I've been talking for a while, so I'll be brief on this one. Let's see. True love lasts forever. No. I'm so interested in how many of these cliches have true attached to love, which is my way of buying myself time before I explain my initial reaction to this. But there's something fascinating to me about the idea that we would attach that, because we don't talk about fake love, do we? Or we don't talk about false love the way you talk about a false positive for a COVID test or something like that, or a pregnancy test. So there's something about the true that is really jarring to me about this sentence. And then I'm actually quite a pessimist in this way. I actually think that you only really realize that you are in love with someone once it's over. And I think it has to end prematurely, and I think it has to end badly. And I think we essentially live our lives not like Madame Bovary or like either Aristophanes or Plato or like the characters in Elective Affinities. We live them like we're in a Proust novel. We're in a novel by Proust. We live them feeling love only at the moment when it is gone, when we feel like we haven't done enough to keep it with us. We fixate on the aftermath of it. I often think that true love, putting quotes around true, is almost indifferentiable from that kind of obsession. And this is actually why, to get back to your third point, I don't find breakups weird. I think we love being in that state, because I think that state is actually what makes us feel alive. I think the state of being heartbroken and obsessive and fixating and wondering and desiring and desiring and desiring and feeling like that lack is ever present is actually what makes us feel alive. So I would disagree quite strongly.
So we're masochists.
We're masochists. Yes, I do. I think we are often quite masochistic. Yeah, and I think the trick is to find comedy in that masochism. Which is what, I'm looking at Ross, because Ross Benjamin over here is the translator of Kafka's diaries. And so when I'm thinking about Kafka's letters to Felice and his letters to Melina. So yes.
Yeah, it seems one of the roots of
Yeah.
that idea is this idea of soulmates and wanting to fuse back together into our original organic whole. But what do you think, Agnes?
So I guess I think I had 3 thoughts. So first, it's like forever is a long time. So that's going to be a high bar there. But both true and false love lasts a lot longer than you expect it to. Like, at least in the sense of,
Wait, what's false love for you?
like, where like if you say you think you're in love and then later you're like, no, that wasn't real love. Let's call that false love. So I like the haunting after the relationship. Like, I still have nightmares. I still have nightmares about, not just men from the past, but like actually friendships of mine, like non-romantic friendships that have broken up. These loves that in a way I want them to be over and they refuse to be over. It's almost like nothing is over ever. But I wanted to say something about the true. I think it's a really interesting observation, the true love, because so say I have some friends. I have a whole bunch of friends, and I'm introducing them to you. I wouldn't say this in front of them, but this was like my really close friend, and like we just met, but she's nice, and like her and I get along sometimes. We have kind of like a love-hate thing going. And like I wouldn't say in front of them. That could be true, right? That could be true about your friends, that you differentially like are into them and get along with them, and you might be like really close friends or not close friends. And but somehow we do not have degrees of like being romantically in love with badly or something is the spectrum. And so that's weird, right? Another weird thing, which is that the bar, like, starts at 11 or something. And so I think that's why we put these intensifiers in front of the word. It's almost like by saying true love, you're indicating you mean romantic love. Romantic love is that kind of love where it starts at 11, where the lowest setting is true, like, I'm totally in love, and you can only go up from there to like madly or insanely or whatever. And so that's just another weird fact about love. And it doesn't come in these gradations that other kinds of love do. I want to say something about Emma too, Emma Bovary, which is, and this might be related. So like it goes back to the love is all you need. Like I think it's a really powerful cliche. Like it's kind of falsehood. The kind of it's an illusion that's a very powerful relationship with this guy Leon. And like they're romantic, not perfect, but going okay until like she's terribly in debt, because like in addition to having these cultural aspirations, she also has like she's not paying any financial attention to signing all these notes, promissory notes, that are like getting her into debt, and that's what ruins her. And she goes to Leon and is like, "Can you get a whole bunch of money for me?" And he tries and he can't. And she's like, "I guess in love." That's why she does it. And you never hear another word about him from her at that point. That's it. It's over. It's like totally done, right? So it's like for Emma, love somehow has to unite like every part of her life and tie it into a bow, solving all of her problems. And so if he doesn't provide everything I need, it can't be true love. Add to my list of a fifth very, very weird thing about love, which is sort of one way that I thought of describing that feature, the totalizing thing, is say you like fountain pens, and so buy them on eBay. Okay, those appeared in my mind. Buy them on eBay, but there's 2 ways you could be into fountain pens on eBay. One of them is you're assembling a collection. So you're like, I don't have one with an iridium nib yet, or I don't have one with a wide nib, right? And you want all these different fountain pens to add to your collection. So I call that collector mindset, where you want a bunch of the different good things. But another thing you could be doing, and there are fountain pen people like this, where they're always searching for their one perfect pen that they're then going to use for everything, right? And if they get a new one, it replaces one, because it has to complete all their writing needs. That's perfecter mindset, okay? And so like with a lot of things in life, like with books, I have collector mindset. I get a new book, I don't have to like throw away my old books. I just add it to my books, right? But you get a new romance, somehow you got to throw away your old romance. And so I think that's one of the features of love, is that we have perfecter mindset in relation to romantic love.
But the only thing, I mean, we haven't talked about this, but you going back to Emma reminded me that this time around when I read it, I was struck by what an inattentive, really, what a bad mother she is.
She's terrible.
She's right. She's a terrible mother. And in some ways, she can't help it, right? She actually can. One does not get the sense that it's a choice for her.
She doesn't care about her kid.
She doesn't care. Well, and she sees the kid. The kid is an extension of everything that she wants to escape.
Mm.
The kid away,
Yeah.
the daughter away, who wants to. What's little Bertha?
Yes,
it's Bertha.
yes.
Yeah. See, I can't even remember. But I was thinking about how we've been talking so much about romantic love, but we started kind of going back and forth about our children, and about talking about, your initial analogy for the second problem that you flagged was talking about the jealousy that one's children can feel for each other or for one another. And when I think about my children, that's actually where everything I've said just goes out of the window. Like, I think that love does last forever. I need no concepts to justify it. It is like the purest form of like Kantian aesthetic judgment, right? I'm like, you're beautiful. I love you, qualifiers whatsoever. I want to fuse with you, and I refuse to believe that we can't. That sounds gross. I don't mean it that way. And so I'm curious about whether or not the analogies that we want to set up between mother and child or parent and child love are actually then appropriate to apply either logically or analytically, psychoanalytically or whatever, to the scene of adult love. Because the thing that frustrates me most about my husband is when he's like, well, my parents love me unconditionally. And I'm like, yeah, they're your parents. Like, you're a grown-ass man, not my baby. Like, what do you think is happening here? His parents are watching. What's up, Gary? But I do think that, for me at least, all this thinking that we're doing, right, that kind of hits a dead end when I think about my children. I feel very Wittgensteinian. I'm like, okay, your love represents the limit of my thought. That's where interpretation ends for me too. I'm like, there are actually no interpretive moves I'm interested in. I can endlessly analyze all of my relationships. I can even analyze my relationship with my own parents. But when it comes to my children, I have a very unreconstructed, and some would probably say quite conservative or whatever, understanding of what my love toward them is. And I wonder if you do too.
I think I don't.
No.
I think so.
I'm joking.
I think I see parenting as it's like somebody's running away from you in very slow motion. Like, there's this baby, and you hold the baby, and it's yours, and you fulfill all of its needs, and then after a little bit, you're putting it in a stroller or something. It's like a little distance from you, and then it starts to walk, and but still need to hold your hand, and then at some point it goes off to school, and like you don't know what they're doing for half the day. They're not with you anymore. They're away from you. Like, you can tell yourself they're mine while they're at school, but like, they're not there. And they spend more time with their friends, and they become a person. They just become some person out in the world. And as much as you want to hold on to them and fuse with them, like, you can't. That's the one thing you can't. It's the one thing you want to do, and it's something you can't do. And it's like this law that you have to keep giving yourself over and over again of like, it's not my job to turn this person into me. It's really my job to just stand by and let this person be who they're going to be, a person for whom at some point, not too long from now, I'm not going to be that significant. Because there's stuff to do. Like, and I say this as mother of my oldest is in college, and he's his own person. And that's to me, that's very, I guess it's very, very different from romance in that the prohibition against attachment, in a way, it's like baked into the contract. It's like, from the beginning, this person is leaving you. And you just, that's what it is to be a parent, is to sort of accept that. And you accept it in so many little ways all the time, because it's like, so much of parenting for me anyway is like, my kid's doing something that annoys me, but I'm like, take a step back. Does this matter? That like, do you have to correct this? Do you like, don't just play yourself out on them. Like somehow interact with them as though you didn't see them as an extension of you. Like, it's really hard. And so it's like, it feels like a challenge kind of all the time. But I mean, in a way, I agree. Baseline of the sort of dream of my attachment to them that is always there in me, right? Mm-hmm. But I know that I am not allowed to really demand permanent reciprocation of that.
But I don't think it's about demanding. I think it's baked so deep into one's, whatever you want to call it, kind of substratum of our being, that it's the kind of love that makes no demands and needs no answers.
Mm.
But I mean, I think that increasing distance of a child away from you is a sign of success. That they can become independent and on their own, whereas romantic love, it's the opposite. It's like trying to pull the other person like closer and closer.
Well, also, you keep haunting the child. I mean, it's not like you're ever, if you've done it right. Agnes's mom is here right now, so come on. Like, should we do another one of these? Or
Yeah,
are
I
we?
mean,
How are we on time?
Time for one more quick one?
No, we have 2 minutes.
Okay. It's your turn. It's your turn.
All right. The course of true love never did run smooth. Now there is a low bar, because what has ever run smooth? The course of false love, the course of anything,
The MTA.
I mean, I suppose maybe what this is getting at is like a magic flute. Like, oh, there's got to be all these tests, before we know whether you really love the person. So we have this. Now, it's not just that the course doesn't run smooth. We can artificially make it run badly to test whether you really love the person. Mm-hmm. So love often involves trials, and often, one person is in effect setting up the trials, and that person is often the woman. Like tests and trials and things. And my husband complains I still do that. And so, the course of true love does not run smooth. We make sure that it doesn't.
And it's the premise of all meet-cute romantic comedies, right?
Right, all Shakespearean romance, like the genre of romance is about the lovers meeting, and then they are separated, and then they get to come back together. But I think what you're saying is so interesting, because even if it could run smooth, we find ways for it not to. And that's what we want, right? We want to feel like we've overcome something. Yeah. Because to overcome something in order to get what you want, to make the thing that you have gotten all the more precious and exciting and valuable. So we want obstacles. We want it not to run smooth. And in fact, I think it's a problem once it does start running smooth. Like, that's boredom. Mm-hmm. That's the death of everything. That is the best and also the least interesting marriage in War and Peace or in Middlemarch, right? You don't want to be Rosamund and Fred Vincy. You don't want it to be smooth.
So I'm thrilled to have one of the greatest psychotherapists of our time join us for this conversation and join this already illustrious panel with Agnes and Merve and Anna. Esther, I was just saying, Esther and I first met at a cocktail party where basically neither of us knew anyone. and we started, our first conversation was about existentialism and love. And I was like, you'd already published your first book, which I very much admired. So Esther consults for Fortune 500 companies around the world. Her 10 million views. She has podcast called Where Do We Begin? And she has a game, which I really recommend. And version 2 is just coming out, is that right? Mm-hmm. Yes, and she's just about to start on a huge US tour. So we're thrilled that you're able to squeeze us in amidst everything else you're doing. So
Gotta do a salon sometime.
So some of the things we were talking about in the first session was about some of the cliches and the distortions about love. We were talking about true love and what even is that, and how does it differentiate from false love, and how these cliches can be very unproductive. And where we're in the end is like this talking about this distance between lovers, and how to navigate that, and is there a happy medium? And there was the suggestion that maybe harmony is boring and what we love is the drama. So Esther, I'd love to. I know.
Do you love the drama?
In Mating in Captivity, you do talk about this distance. Like, how do we navigate that tension, the distance between lovers where we want to be close, but also you talk about how it's important to keep our distance, to keep some of the mystery alive. Like, how do we navigate that? Is the drama a good thing?
There's two different questions. So I thought of it as philosophical. It minds itself in a daily clinic. It's about 40 years of doing couples therapy. So there's nothing empirical about it, which means I don't think that anything I say is true. I think there is such a thing as true love. These words in and of themselves are the subject of inquiry for a therapist. But I think that one of the descriptions that you had is a good start for here, where you said you used it in application with the child. But in fact, it is this application with the child that then becomes a part of the adult scenario, which is, if all goes well, you have a little one and it sits on your lap. And it starts by being nested, cozy, comfortable, safe, secure. And if all goes well, little one jumps off and goes to discover and look out to see what's happening in the world. Engages in play, discovery, exploration. I'm giving it to you in version of little one, but you can instantly translate it in adult one. But it's the developmental arc of that. And then at some point, little one turns around and looks at you. And if they see that you're there and you say to them a version of, kiddo, the world's a great place, go ahead, discover, I'm right here, what do they do? They turn around and they go further. That distance cannot take place without the closeness. They are in dialectic with each other, they're in interaction with each other. And say, go for it, enjoy, I'm right here, whenever you want to. Says, I'm miserable. Paid any attention to me, God knows how long. I need you together, just you and I, good fusional language. You have about three main options, three main scenarios. Child number one comes right back and basically creates a script in their head that in order not to lose you, I will lose a part of me. I will forego my freedom to secure our connection. Child number two is zesty, wants to go further, and continues into the world, but they're constantly looking over their shoulder. Are you okay? You're not going to scold me. You're not going to collapse on me. You're not going to be depressed. How far can I go before I need to turn back? Because you're going to find some way to make me come back. And child number three doesn't come back to anything because there's nothing to come back to. So separateness or distance or autonomy or independence, whichever language you want to use, lives side by side with closeness, connection, togetherness. They are not, you can't have one without the other. They're part of an ecosystem together. And this is the same for an adult. I think what I challenged maybe in mating, but yeah, I like your triad. You're always talking in threes. So I'll do a triad as well, which is number one, that more intimacy begets sexuality or begets desire. And it needed for me the sentence, more intimacy begets sexuality sometimes. Sometimes it's something else. There's not one script. Sexual problems are the consequence of relationship problems. And sometimes the sex is not a metaphor of relationship issues. It's a parallel narrative, and it tells its own story, and it grapples with its own obstacles. And assumption number three is that If you fix the relationship, sex follow. And that means that sometimes you do fix the relationship and it gets much better in the kitchen and it does absolutely nothing for the bedroom. And so in that notion that more closeness, more desire, love and desire, to me, they relate and they conflict, and herein lies the mystery of eroticism.
Is that where the drama is too? In that
No, this is you talked about obstacles. One of my favorite erotic equations is that excitement is attraction plus obstacles. It's not mine, it's Jack Morin. Attraction plus equals excitement. So in that sense, the linear plot, the story where you have nothing to circumvent, definitely doesn't make for an interesting love story. It's not the one we want to read and not the one we want to watch. But it exists because there is a model that is companionate, affectionate coupledom, and it's filled with love, but it's a different kind of love. It's not a passionate love, it's not eroticized necessarily, but it lives deeply inside the two people. So,
but in Mating in Captivity, what really struck me, first of all, I love you are debunking so many of the myths. I love the part when you go to this American conference where everybody's like, we have to kink because it comes from your domineering father. And you were like, sometimes, right? Love as something tragic. We often go into it. And motherhood also as a self-sacrifice. There's something like, you will live and I will die. And what I got from your book, and I'm representing the single population on this panel, by the way, was that what's tragic about these affairs is not what we think is tragic, is this constant, unstoppable attempt to give up our own freedom, and the people who end up on your couch, right?
to give up our freedom?
Yes, that there are these attempts by people to give it up. And what seems to me to kind of trickle down from all these stories is that all these very benevolent people who go to couples therapy, who seek out, who pay, who take their, who humble themselves, who pay for this, who take up, the calendar.
I think that everybody straddles two fundamental sets of human needs. Maybe that's kind of the point. So it involves connection or to closeness and separateness or distance. Everybody is born and needs to straddle these two fundamental sets of human needs. They pull us in different directions and they spring from different sources. Romantic love tries to tell you that they're one and the same. That's the story of romantic love. That is not the story of all love. When you come out of your childhood, some of you may have found that you needed more freedom, more space, more individuality, more personal expression. And some of you may have thought that you need more connection, protection, closeness, togetherness, safety, security. One of you will therefore be a person who is more in touch with your fear of losing the other, and one of you will be more in touch with your fear of losing yourself. One more afraid, of the personal dissolution, and one more afraid of abandonment. And of course, it so happens that these two often mate. Because we tend to be drawn, and this is back to the soul mating, that's a whole trope. But you tend to be a person whose proclivities match our vulnerabilities. We have a real knack for outsourcing onto someone else to deal with the part of us that we don't really want to deal with. That's complementarity. That's very an attraction about differences. So, love often needs closeness. Love kind of operates with the verb to have. Love wants to minimize the distance, neutralize the tensions, all of that, close the gaps. Desire needs space. Desire needs a distance. It needs a bridge and somebody to visit on the other side. It needs an elan. And the way I began to think about it was by asking one question that I kind of took me to 27 countries. When do you find yourself most drawn to your partner? Not what would you say?
And they're not there.
Yes, of course. And that's one is the only one that makes people laugh, and that's interesting in and of itself too. Yeah, keep going. I'm most drawn to my partner when partners of every denomination, every gender, every orientation. Yeah.
When he's explaining Aristotle to me.
Yes. When he's in his element, when he's radiant, when he shines, when he's confident. That's what this stands for. And that could be when he talks about Aristotle, or when he's on his horse, or on the slope, or on the stage. It doesn't matter. The activity, it's the confidence, it's the radiance, and it's the fact that he's self-sufficient and he doesn't need her. Because if he needed her, she could be caring and loving, but it wouldn't be particularly erotic.
Why do you think people laugh?
On the
Yeah. Why do you? Is it
that
because they
desire-
don't want to admit it?
because it kind of says, you know, like I like you when you're not here, type thing. Of course, desire is rooted in absence and in longing, and it involves when we are apart. Why when you are apart? Because when you're not there, I get to reconnect with my imagination of you. It's not because you're not there. It's because there is a space to dream of you, of us, of the and sometimes it's when we reunite, you know. This one is the main one. It's every version about confidence, radiance, and not needing, you know, not going for care. It is about the distance. It is about surprise. And then there is only one that is gender specific, by the way. It's when he plays with the kids. And the fourth one is actually when we are in a triad, when the dyadic gaze is interrupted by the entry of a third, a fourth, whatever. When I see my partner to the eyes of others, because it breaks the spell and the rigidity of how we basically create very conforming, you know, repetitious ideas of each other. Actually, that's what the story starts out very bad editors.
So Esther, what does that mean for realistic loving, and how should we be realistic about loving given these attractions?
But somebody used the word before, delusion. It was
I used
Hold on to it. I mean, I do think that the experience of love comes with a very good dose of self-deception. It's useful. I mean, if you really had to know the truth of your partner in its nakedness, it'd be unbearable half the time. You know, you want just a bit of self-delusion, actually. You don't want denial, but you do want to hold on to something imaginative. That is what allows you to step outside of the situations that we get into and kind of say it's not that important because there's a bigger plot. There's a master. It's in. This is where philosophers, we talk about the relationship. And most of the time when people sit in my office, they're not particularly talking about love. That's not why they come. Though it's not unusual, but you know, couples therapy is a drop-off center. You know, everybody brings somebody that they deliver and just say, fix them. And I'll help you. Because I'm an expert on the matter. So we don't talk much about love. But what we do talk about is that in somewhere in the nascent love, in the origin story, people decided that this person was going to be somebody for them, was going to be taking on a role for them. With you, I will never fear abandonment. With you, I will never feel stupid. With you, I will never fear destitution. With you, you know, and they imbue this other person with characteristics, skills, strengths, and it's a total projection. And what destroys the love is the inability to realize that those were projections and that, you know, phase one is this idealization, but phase two is you slowly begin to realize that person doesn't necessarily conform to your expectations. Expectations are resentments in the making, you know, and the more you come with them and the more the solution you're going to have. And then you become dogged about wanting this other person to respond the way that you think they should respond. That's the killer. It's this, because it becomes very rigid, very predictable, and I don't love you because you're not the person that I imagined that you would be for me. And that's where the distance comes in. The distance is also, if you put your finger right here, none of you can see your finger. It's very simple. It needs to be there to see the contours. If you want to see the other, you need separateness. But for some of us, that separateness is very scary. Can go on.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah,
a slightly different tack. So we've never found a good couples therapist. We had, I'm not going to ask you to be ours, but there was one who suggested we do community theater together. There was one who just had a giant poster of a clown behind her couch, which was very distracting. There was one who broke up with us for countertransference reasons, and we could never figure out which one of us was being countertransferred onto. How do you think of the being a couples therapist, and how do you negotiate your own distance or closeness with the people that you encounter?
Do you ever listen to Where Should We Begin?
Yeah.
You tell me what I do. I can't, I'm honest, right? I don't think I do the same thing each time.
Mm-hmm.
I edited a tape yesterday, and it's coming up. It's fascinating. It's been a long time that I was with somebody that every time I said something, he said, but. Like I couldn't get through. It was just, and it would have been so easy to hear this person as he rationalizes, he intellectualizes, and his age fits. And was allowed in her house, but in the session she becomes extreme, and he just suddenly his gaze goes like, can't take it, and I'm realizing that it's not her anger that's upsetting to him. It's way more scary for him that she be sad. When she's angry, he can criticize her. When she's sad, he wants to fix her instantly. He can't tolerate it. I was very proximal with him. That's why I'm bringing him up. And I kept listening yesterday and thinking, Perel, move back. Don't stay there. This is not the way. You don't go like this. You go like this, And I did it toward the end, but not enough. And so, what is the role of a couples therapist? There are different roles, because you ask people, what brings you, and what's the thing. And you don't take that story as a given. You basically, to my mind, people come with a story. This is the way this gets written. People write to you, they write a description of what's going on. By the time you meet, they tell you the exact same story with the same words. And that's when you know that you're not entering there. This is it. This is the trap. Right? Because you don't go for the content, you go for the form. That's the most important thing you need to learn as a couples therapist. And you're working with very smart people. And so when you work with people like you, it's even more important to never listen to the story. Just to look at the frame, at the dynamic. When this person does this, it makes this one do exactly what this one actually hates, but they don't realize how they set them up. That kind of thing. You look at the form precedes the content, right? And so the next thing you do is people come in with one story, and pretty much by the end of the first session, you want them to leave with a different story. What they thought was the issue is just what they thought was the issue, but it may not be the actual issue. And that is liberating, because people come in primarily because they're stuck. Doesn't matter what they're stuck about, they're stuck. And stuckness looks alike. There's only three, four versions of what stuckness looks like. Yeah. It's either this, this, or this. It's like music. It has a rhythm and so That said, I have gone to quite a few couples therapies, and I have found very few that were that really stayed with me and did something. It's one of the most difficult forms of therapy, and it's often one of the most useless forms of therapy. A, because people come too late, and two, because most couples therapists are not trained to think systemically, and they are overwhelmed, and they watch the whole drama unfold in front of them, and they have no idea.
It's crazy, by the way, because this is how I built Interinsight. This is why we have so much. This is why we child art. And people are like, why do you never have talk with complete strangers together multiple times a day? And because I don't listen to what people say. The first thing is the format, and the format is like music. It's a choreography, and you could even mute the Zoom call and just read the faces and see who takes up. It's like we are monkeys. We cluster on different rocks based on preferences, right? And you see the structure, and then when you turn on the volume, you're like, oh, actually, they're having the best conversation in their lives, but it's about the format. And I think, we just make these sounds, right? And we figured out how to use sound to shorten distance, right? Like we are the monkeys, we are sitting on the rock, and you want to, there's a gap behind you in the rocks. And I can either go to you and be like, Agnes, don't do it, or I can be like, hey, Agnes, and then you stop and turn and you don't fall, right? What did I do? I like shorten the distance. And I think that if you look at a play, if you take like Chekhov, right? And you blur out what the characters are saying, and you just look at the volume, you know the story. If somebody told you that there is like this cherry orchard and like there's this huge drama in this family, you can kind of see the dramaturgy in the volume. And I think we should have more fluid dynamics physicists working on dialogue.
One of the great interventions is to actually make people fight for 13 minutes. It's not mine, it's my friend Eddie Schleifer. You fight for 13 minutes. You can't make it less than 13 minutes.
Okay.
There's no reason for it. There's just no reason. This is just a total arbitrary thing. You fight for 30 minutes. And then she says, you see, this couple just had a whole fight. And they speak a language, it's called Bajilian.
I ran this experiment for
And then you see one. And then that. And this is whole thing, and you pretty much, you don't need to know what they thought about, but no, one is dismissive, one is upset, one pushes further. The more one pushes, the other one turns around. The more the other one turns around, the more this one becomes the whole thing. So you don't need the text. Is that what you're saying, right? It's a lovely intervention.
Agnes.
Okay, I'm the opposite of everything you've just said. Like, I only hear the text. Okay, I'm going to ask, I have so many questions for you. This is a chance, so I'm going to ask questions.
Three, and then we pick one.
Tell me what you want to go on, because the first one's a little long and complicated. Two angels, hanging on my shoulder, or devil, or whatever. I have two possible interpretations of you, and I'm always torn between them. And the one is, you're telling me there's a bunch of trade-offs here. You can navigate them differently if you want to. That's the basic situation. So when you say things like, well, desire needs space, but love brings us close, like trade-offs. Or the other thing I sometimes hear you say is, there's some low-hanging fruit. You can just pick it and just get something better. Okay. So let me give you an example. So, you talk about how people often don't have the really difficult conversations about their relationship until a crisis moment, right? And I'm sort of like, yeah, because they're really risky and they can go a number. And so of course they don't have them. Hard trade-offs, like have them later when things get bad enough. Now it's like, okay, maybe this goes bad, so badly anyway, might as well have this terrible conversation. That's one interpretation. Or another interpretation I have with you is saying, no, look, if you could just have these conversations early in your relationship, everything would just go better. There's just some low-hanging fruit that you want, everything. So this is my chance to ask you, which is the right Esther?
Okay, I think that relational problems are complex. And in that sense, they are not binary. It's not this or that. It's often this and that, and it may be this at one point in your life and that afterwards, at another stage. Or this in this relationship and that. So it's both ends. For some, it would be more of this. I do think that, there was a time when I arrived to the States, it was in the midst of the AIDS epidemic, and for the first time, people had to really, I came from the generation with the pill and before AIDS. We didn't have to ask many questions. We were free. Then suddenly you arrive here in the 80s, and it's really bad news, and people have to start asking questions. That was a very difficult conversation to ask, but it was worth it. I mean, you better ask it. So every era, every time, every period has new questions or new conversations that people need to have. Yeah? This is just one that is very obvious because it's a public health one, so it kind of envelops the whole society. It's not just these people. Okay, monogamy, you could say it's a conversation for some people, but safe sex is kind of and you learn to have these conversations. You learn to have conversations when you are in a family and you have children of the parents with different family units. That's a whole conversation that has never existed. You need to have that conversation. So that doesn't mean that when you have the conversation, it solves every problem. But it often can be helpful, or at least you know what's keeping you from resolving something or finding answers for yourself.
If you need to, do you then just see that you need to? Or is this some area of life where we become blind to our needs, which is odd?
I think, I mean, it's both ends. Life at times puts you in front of the subject that you have been avoiding. Do you really want another child? And are you prepared to go through all the treatments to have that other child? Or you were willing to do it if you just play the die and, let's see what happens? I probably if I go down the day, the rest of the day, I'll give you 10 examples of these kind of, situations. So when I write about affairs, yes, I think that at some point, it's an amazing thing how suddenly people. This is one of the big discoveries. Some people after the crisis of an affair, there's no conversation to be had. But some people find themselves having the first time conversations with a level of honesty and depth that they've never known existed between them. And you kind of think, shit, did this need to happen for this to take place? Apparently, yes. And then the question is, does it last, etc. But of course, I am part of the talk therapy culture. So I have brought into certain assumptions. And these are assumptions. There are plenty of cultures where people don't talk about any of this, and they function with a different model. I mean, this is Western psychotherapy. Many other cultures, she doesn't have to come with him to therapy because they're talking. So that takes care of that. This is an assumption, right? This is us here, believing that the past is important. That we need to understand the past in order to make sense of the present. These are all assumptions. Freud had an assumption that there was a thing called the Oedipus complex. That one is gone. But today the new assumption is everybody's traumatized. That's a new assumption. You all are traumatized. Says a few people. And that's an assumption. That too shall pass. Because the truth of today is the joke of tomorrow.
Does therapy threaten the delusion that you're saying is necessary for love?
That's a great question. So, a certain kind of therapy says that you need to have realistic love. That is the dominant model. And today I interviewed a guy who does dyadic coping on stress in couples from a complete cognitive behavior therapy. Everything was programmed, every sentence, and I'm sure it's effective. But the question is, do you want effective or do you want something else? I don't necessarily do therapy that is effective. So I don't have a model. I have an approach. I have a sense of how, I have, and it's a narrative approach. I come from systemic and narrative thinking towards relationship. Many cognitive and focused on the mind, where there's lots of schools, there are many vocabularies. You have to be and hopefully you're multilingual. Because often people come to the therapy that reinforces their defenses, but that's not the one they need. So it's really about being multilingual, but multilingual is not hip these days. These days, everybody, their little niche, their little school, their acronym, and their 300 hours of training on that little acronym. That's not my era, but that is what's happening now, with a lot of techniques and skills and stuff like that. And that's that. Next thing, this just to finish, is that much of couples therapy, and that would be the same about should you be realistic about, and so that you won't be disappointed. It's very unpoetic. It actually does. It strips you, that kind of therapy. It's all of that. You would find it very bad literature. But there are other kinds of therapies, and it's a little bit like when you do literary criticism.
Well, I was going to ask something. I was very struck by your metaphor that we become bad editors, and I was thinking how one form of editing that sometimes takes place in therapy that you say
Too much.
Yes. Well, this is what I was going to ask. You say I fell in love with you because of this and that projection, this and that fantasy. And then you end up editing that, right? You say, I fell in love with you because you're the opposite of my father. Did not feel safe with my father, and I felt safe with you because your characteristics are diametrically opposed to his.
So I thought you were going to lead me to something different.
Okay, what did you think I was going to lead you to?
That, because this goes together with the soulmating that you discussed before.
Yeah.
The soulmating, which I'll say a thought about after, is also wrapped with the I can tell you everything. I can tell you everything. And then I go to therapy that believes in the fact that you need to tell even more. And I'm thinking some of the stuff should never be said out loud. Why? Go talk to your girlfriend. Go talk to your brother. But don't. Why? Why? What do you need to say things that people will never get out of their head? So that's part of the bad editing.
Yes. Well, this is what I was going to ask. Are there things that should be off limits?
Yes.
And how does one know? Because I can imagine that situation where you're just supposed to fight for 13 minutes and you say the absolute worst things that you could possibly think of. I never loved you. You're a horrible father.
Honesty is about truth-telling. Honesty is about what it will be like for the other person to walk around with that truth. One is a face-saving thing. The other one believes in the moral cure of transparency and honesty. And we live in that era here, even more than ever before. Our grandparents didn't talk like this to each other, but it keeps getting more and more. Well, there's lots of influences that lead to that. But honesty is a cultural concept. So the first thing is also you look at who is there in front of you and what were you told about? If you live in a culture that promotes harmony, responsibility, then honesty is a virtue. So that needs to happen in therapy. You have to be multicultural in therapy, otherwise you're just applying. The next thing is, here's my criteria. And this is what I say to people. If you say this now, and if you have to fight the 30 minutes and you spill stuff, you've already said this before. This is not, if you say this now, or if you do this now, what will this do to the relationship? What it does to the relationship is another night without another word, or 3 days of silence, or one of you thinking that you're just being completely manipulated, etc., then you know your answer. Couples therapy is not about this and this. It's about this. And this thing is called the relationship. It's the third entity. And what you're treating is that entity. You can be right, but you will be alone. And you can decide if you want to be right or you want to be wise.
It seems like an incredibly complicated question. What will this do to the relationship? Like, you're making really sophisticated predictions there about other people's mental states and how they're going to respond, what might happen.
Like this guy yesterday, he tells his wife every time she's getting upset with the kid, "You're a shitty mom." He doesn't say it in words, but it's exactly what he's conveying to her every single time. What do you think that does to the relationship when somebody says to somebody with a newborn, "You're a shitty mom"?
That seems like a good question, and a question you might then face when you've said something and someone says to you, what do you think that how you can take it? You can be like, oh, right. But to be faced with that question in advance, like if before everything I said, I asked myself, what will this do to my relationship?
There are certain things. When you're married for long enough or you're partnered for long enough, you know that there are certain things that you can say that will wound forever. Right? You know, I think you come to know the person well enough that you know exactly where to stick the knife and how to turn it. And you know that even once you pull it out, that wound will never heal. And I think that what's to be good at it, if we can talk about being good at therapy, but one of the ways to be good at it, right, is to constantly have that self-editing mechanism going as you're speaking to
It's
the other
not
person.
useful to tell your partner, "I still pine every night for my lover." It's not useful to tell your partner, "It's been 12 years, I'm debating every day if I should leave you." You either do it or you don't, but you don't have to say it. It's not useful, it's ambivalence is a perfect example of the stuff that you don't necessarily need to share. Because it's
Do you know this short story called The Dead by Joyce? Okay, so it's a short story. There's this guy, Gabriel Conroy, and they're at a party with his wife, Greta Conroy, and at the end, they go back to their like teenage love.
the one who got away.
The one who got away. He died, yeah. And the final moments of the story is just Gabriel looking out at the snow, just sort of shattered, and somehow shattered. I don't at all feel sure you don't tell your partner, I've been pining for someone else my whole life. Like, I feel like that moment is kind of an amazing and wonderful moment for Greta and for Gabriel. Sometimes it is the thing to tell your partner.
True. Eyes wide shut. True. So sorry. Can I just give the mic to one of our attendees? Because I was here at Grace's event, and Kevin, you were talking about, I believe that when it comes to human dignity, we have a lot to learn from each other between cultures. And we were talking a little bit about the Buddhist concept of the right speech. Do you maybe, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Are you happy to share what you shared with Grace is sitting right behind you at her salon last week?
I thought of it as well.
Yeah.
Sure. It's this idea in Buddhism called right speech, that the person's in the right sort of state to receive it. So it's maybe an argument against.
It's a more systemic approach.
Yeah, and
It's more relational. To speak, you need to think about the person who's going to hear it, and you need to say and get off your chest. Is that?
Because I mean, there are some religions who think or that state that words can murder. Like in the Talmud, they tell you not to kill with your words.
Sarah never told Abraham he was an old fart.
But there's a more analytic reason not to do it too, right? Because the second someone is staging their honesty, they're almost always being a little bit self-deceiving.
Say more.
Well, I think that oftentimes when people make these grand pronouncements or they say the thing that is supposed to shock you into reality, I don't know how totally aware they are of their own desires. They want to do something to you. They want to shock you because it helps you be more aspirational. But I wonder if it's always as you think it is. Or maybe that there's a disjuncture here between truth and you can be kind. Yeah.
Maybe what are the effects of your words? But there is such a thing as being non-strategic, where you're just gonna say stuff and blurt it out and let the chips fall where they may. And sometimes in life, like there are these moments, like Greta Conroy has this moment where she's just gonna blurt it out. And I guess I agree that there's a lot of time and place for being strategic. How people are going to respond to the very thing that you're saying and figuring that into what you should say. But it's pretty important that there are times and places for this kind of non-strategic form of expression that is sort of selfish.
But what I'm saying is part of the reason she blurts it out is because he's made her feel small by puffing himself up, right? So it's not just about sharing him into reality. It's about trying to find a way to make her. And I'm just saying that I think that honesty is
talked about
complicated.
anger and revenge. Divine. And when people look for their soulmate today, on an app on top. You know, and they're looking for this one and only, which was God. And they want with that person to experience transcendence and wholeness and mystery and ecstasy, all the stuff that people really used to go to. You know, this is a Robert Johnson, a Jungian analyst, who talks about that this represents a kind of a collapse between the spiritual and the social. You know, this idea that you're going to find one person that has the soulmate and the romantic love have kind of blurred together and created the grand illusion, the grand ambition of romantic love is that there is one person for everything. And this is the biggest fallacy of this whole thing. And when people marry free love, free choice, romantic love, and they buy into that model, it's a setup. Because, you know, the expectations for romantic love at this moment are absolutely unprecedented. People have never, it's everything that has to do with the traditional model of companionship. Then it's about giving what the community gave, which is belonging and continuity and identity. Then it's about best friend, trusted, confidant, passionate lover. And then it's about making me the best version of myself. It's an identity project. And this is romantic love 2024.
It's very
So the response to it is polyamory, distribution.
But isn't it even? Let me be the Eastern European on the panel, or one of. Isn't it even worse? Because what you do is not. I mean, most people don't just find this ideal fountain pen, as Agnes was using this metaphor, and then you project all your kind of numinous, transcendental yearnings on this individual. What people, in my experience, do is to create a kind of bubble around themselves in which they can experience the transcendental alone, and basically use this other person, often without actually connecting. And when the other person proves not to be the actual source of the transcendental desire, then you are disappointed.
Yep.
So it's not even a couple. It's a person with a something.
Well, that's like
Emotional
Stendhal.
capitalism.
That's like Stendhal. It's crystallization.
in Madame Bovary, Flaubert is already talking about this 2024 problem because it's her all.
That's why he was cancelled, according to y'all,
Her
right?
journey starts with the religious. So her earliest romantic expression is she's having this religious, education with the nuns, and there's this track that she's on to like be a nun, and she has access to the OG spiritual experience and away from it. And she goes back to it after Rodolphe, right? Briefly, she's like, maybe I'll do the religion again. What's interesting to me is like, why? If God is your soulmate, and then she's in this society where they're like, here you go, here's your soulmate, God.
But does she let go of it, or is it just that she starts sexualizing it later on?
It somehow just doesn't give her what she wants. God is not enough for her. She wants a man. And the question is like,
She doesn't like the aesthetics of the church. So that's part of it. That's part of it for her. I was surprised to hear you say, and so we have polyamory, because I actually
No,
thought,
I was not as serious.
yes. Yes. Well, I was thinking, there's a wonderful queer theorist, Eve Sedgwick, who has a great triangle. I'm looking for a post-Proustian love, is what she says. And she says, I want to imagine that I could just take all the energy of the triangle of the affair and radiate it outward into tens, hundreds, thousands of rays.
The piece of the romantic model, romanticism rose at a time when individualism grows. They go together. And with individualism comes urbanization. And with urbanization comes the lessening of the extended family. And as the community and the extended family diminish, intimacy becomes paramount. And intimacy and we weather the storm, we raise the kids. Intimacy, weather the storm, we raise the kids. Intimacy becomes mirror neurons together. I'm going to share with you my inner life, not my goats, my inner life. And my inner life is my fears, my aspirations, my anxieties, my worries, my dreams. And you're going to reflect back to me. And you're going to make me feel that I matter. And you're going to help me transcend my existential aloneness. This is intimacy, is intimacy. And that is the thing that has, I think we've all drunken that you know, there's, when people tell you about nascent love, what they tell you is, never could speak with anybody like this. We talked for hours, we talked through the night, intimacy.
Yeah. You find your boy next door, but not next door, because that's boring, right? So you move to the big city, you move to another continent, and when you find that experience, the person likes the same music, has the same views, almost as a boy next door, then people have found their soulmate.
Yeah.
I would love to open this up to the audience as well. So if you have questions, please. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the wonderful discussion. My name is Anastasia. For 3 months, like you all.
Sorry, what's your timeline? Months?
Yeah, students there. Listen, right? Okay, half a year, and then she proposes, and then your girlfriends give you a cake, and it says "same dick forever," and you get depressed of the thought of like actually having same dick forever. So what are you going to do with this? How do you deal with like sex and long-term relationship?
It's here.
Oh, you mean making? Yeah. Okay. I haven't read this, so would you summarize?
Maybe the place to start would be to say that sex is not something you do. Sex is a place you go. And so when you go into your, we've done expositions and we finished the repertoire. And eroticism is not just a set of urges and it's actually when you listen to the same song over and over again because you love that song, you're not bored. There are songs that you are listening for decades, and every time you listen to them, they don't like the first time, but they can put you in a good mood, they can make you tear, they help you process something, whatever it is, Same with the dish that you like. There's only sex with which we bring this kind of exceptionalism, that it needs to constantly renew itself and more and better. So when you've got sex is a place you go, then the next thing is, what parts of you do you connect with there? What do you express there? Is it union? Is it spiritual thing? Is it mischief? Is it a breaking of the rules? Is it a surrender? Is it a safe aggression? What is it? What do you express there? What do you experience there, and what do you express there? If you take the doing model, you will express there. What do you experience there, and what do you express there? If you take the doing, if you take the erotic model is basically who you bring, who shows up, and what's the story you weave tonight. Sometimes it's very nice maintenance, Erotic couples have a lot of maintenance. And on occasion, they have a production.
Can I talk about sex? There's a line you have in State of Affair. Many affairs are less about sex than about desire, the desire to feel desire. And then I recalled from mating, you say something about pleasure. And isn't that, in some sense, to eroticize sex?
No, I didn't say about pleasure and desire. I said about performance and pleasure.
Okay.
It's the juxtaposition.
It's about pleasure rather than performance.
Yes. And for that, you don't have to do much.
If
you can do a lot and feel nothing. Women have done this for centuries. I mean, doing doesn't tell you squat. You get it done. People tell me it works. I mean, what do you mean it works? I know what they mean. It's just this is why you could talk before about the life. I mean, the central agent of eroticism is not what you do, it's your imagination. And your imagination is not the positions. are. So one line in State of Affairs that connects with what Emre was saying, I learned. The main 10 years interviewing people who were in affairs, every version of it. What I mean by that is that about 80% of people in an audience have experience with infidelity, either because you're the kid whose parents had it, either because you're the offspring of one, either because you're the third person, either because you're one of the. That is this word worldwide. And then I thought, so what does that alive mean? It wasn't that they were having good sex or great sex, sometimes, but that was not the point. The point was, and this goes to the editing question, that they kept saying it's I wanted to leave the person that I was with. I said I wanted to leave the person that I had become. It's not that I wanted to find somebody else, but I wanted to find other parts of me. And that's the result of a bad editing job, where people become a certain version of themselves in a relationship that is static, narrow, predictable, and then they meet somebody else that opens up a whole other vista onto themselves. That person. That's why most affairs are meant to be just that, an affair. They're not meant to become another life, because they have a different function. And that's part of the editing, and that's part of why I say that affairs are about desire. They're imaginative. I mean, I use the word desire as a way of talking about an imaginative experience of wanting.
We have a question at the back. Do you mind standing up? Yeah, thanks.
And then Greg.
Oh yeah, we have a mic. Throw it. It's good.
I have a couple questions. If that's okay. There's a couple themes that we always talk about. First one's honesty, and about like different kinds of honesty. Also like about saying what you feel, but sometimes I feel like honesty is also re-examining what you said. In a sense, I only realize what is the honest thing to say after I said something. Either it's a lie or is it true? And like, how do you do that in therapy? And also, the second thing is the concept of like God/community. Like in Bible, where there's like a verse that whenever there's two people in love, like God is there. And like I kind of interpret it as like like God is a source of love, but maybe absolute is needed for people to perceive this love. So this thing you mentioned in the beginning, as you mentioned in the beginning, about distance and in self-love. In the sense, I don't know how doesn't that imply theorizing about love, trying to give love, pull of love closer to us defeats the purpose of the theory itself.
We can all respond, maybe not. You want to take one of them?
I feel like I'm being haunted by one of the cliches, and I don't know, like I really don't know how to think about that one. I feel at sea, totally at sea, in thinking about the relationship between self-love. Like it doesn't seem true to me that like it seems like bullying, sort of like you don't deserve love yet. You haven't reached the stage 2 of loving yourself. So you're over it first or something. And yet obviously I also see, well, if you're asking the other person to fulfill some function for you, and then
We can come to love ourselves like through the other person, like through relationships, like through seeing or having made explicit what they see about us. Like it's sort of there can be a confirmation thing, or challenging us in ways that maybe we are oblivious to or we don't see. And so, yeah, I also have a problem with this loving yourself first, because I'm like, okay, first of all, what does that even mean? Like, what does loving yourself mean? Like, I think I take the existential view, of course, that we're growing and becoming and changing and trying out, new versions of ourselves sometimes and trying out new versions of ourselves with other.
Oh, I don't think self-love makes any sense as a concept. Yeah.
Say more.
I can't be an object of my desire or of my own love, that logic simply doesn't hold with me. And I think similar to you, Skye, it's not necessarily an existentialist logic necessarily, but it has something to do with the configuration of subject and object and how fantasy circulates.
Or as Sacha said, we can't split ourselves in two, and because we're we're unreliable narrators of our own stories.
Yeah. Why doesn't it make sense to you?
Because it's the how you say, the summum of individualism. It's individualistic thinking. I mean, first of all, not too long ago, there was no self.
Yeah.
It's like self-love, self-development, self-care, self-this, self-that. Can we talk a little bit about others? We're becoming such experts on ourselves, and that doesn't really help us necessarily in how we respect and respond to others. So but the main thing is self-love in many cultures, which is never called self-love, is when people feel that they are able to fulfill their roles. I'm able to take care of my children. I'm able to take care of my parents. I'm able to provide. And therefore I find that I have dignity. I have self-respect. Those are the terms that are actually being used. It's not I like myself. I feel good about myself. It's like, what the hell is that supposed to be? You know. And then on what basis do you feel good about yourself? On what basis do you develop your self-esteem? You develop self-esteem because you have accomplished certain things. So self-love is action-driven. It's not feeling-driven. This is where the distortion for me takes place. You know, there are plenty of people who can be extraordinarily generous, but they don't particularly like themselves. You know, but this I have to love yourself. Or that people say, I need to take time for myself alone and I need to develop myself first before I can go and be in a relationship. How else do you develop it? You develop in relationships. You learn about yourself in the presence of others. You find yourself in contrast and so I'm fine with it. It exists in the vernacular, but I find it a very uninspiring, not useful. I don't deal much with it's true or not true. I just think it's not useful. And it does, and I don't believe that the self-love by definition is a precedent for the ability to be in relationship with others. No. But I think if you are loved well by others and recognized, that goes a little differently. So
I would even why even further, because I think one in the narrative of self-love and self-care is that the world is far more interesting than I am. Every time what is out there to explore is immense and formidable and amazing. And I often feel that what we should be rather talking about is that a person who is open toward the world and who loves the world and loves being a part of it will be able to love other people. It's not myself that I have to love first, but the experience of being in this madhouse.
are you familiar with the work of Eva Illouz?
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah,
Yes. Why love her? It's called intimacy.
Yes, all of it. I mean, because part of what, wherever you have a culture of self-love, you have a culture of not enough. They go together. It's part of capitalism. You evaluate yourself the whole time. And in that love is the final process of evaluation. You're a good enough product. And I think there is a lot of thought, this very thoughtful, this thing, because it's an amazing thing. People talk about self-love, but what they're actually dealing with the whole time is how they don't love themselves enough. They're not this enough and that enough. And it's this self-evaluation is very critical, because on top of it, it doesn't allow people to know that if you do things, and this may sound, very retro, but there is still something about acting right, doing moral things, doing for others, that makes you feel good about you, because you did the right thing, not because you like yourself. It's a different story. Good about you, because you did the right thing, not because you like yourself. It's a different story.
Next.
Thank you. I literally on the edge of my seat. So thank you for this conversation. This other love cliche has been circling my mind that I wanted to toss into the ring, and it would be, we have such great chemistry. And I'm interested in all of your thoughts on that. I feel like we started touching on it when was saying, oh, but we want the boy next door that we can talk to, but it's just an illusion because we don't actually have connection. And Esther, you were speaking about intimacy and, oh, I can bare my soul to this person. And then way earlier, you spoke a little bit about this attraction that's coming from a lack in one person that the other person is filling. So that's kind of what's circling in my mind around this idea of chemistry and, oh, I met this person and we have chemistry, and what does that mean for our romantic future?
Did you have that one?
We didn't. No,
I
didn't.
But also just it was not necessarily a delusion, but more like an experience, and I think it has to do something with our fascination with love at first sight. And to me, I mean, I come from a big city, but the experience you're supposed to have is, say, I'm from Budapest and I come to New York City and I'm a millennial Budapest humanities academic, right? Like I like Leonard Cohen and watch the Bergman movies, and like there's like a whole roster of the canon that if you like that, that means we are connected. And I'm supposed to have a cultural experience in a completely different place that satisfies my desire for novelty, as if you were the boy next door. And I just find that's hilarious.
Yeah, and that's like, if we meet in that city, then we have chemistry because.
But it's real.
But wait, what are you guys talking about? This is insane. Like, who thinks about chemistry this way? Chemistry is when you go to the bar and the bartender's hot and you have like a conversation for a little bit and you're like, I want to go home with this guy. Like,
No, I was just like adding
what
to
is this?
one
But
of the
I'm
pairs.
totally fascinated. And I got with my husband just before everybody started online dating. So the kind of profiles that you're building here feel quite alien to me. And so for me, chemistry is like you go to a party and someone smells really fucking good. And you dance with that person and it's hot and then you go home with them. Like that's chemistry. So I actually have no idea what you're talking
This is
about.
not about chemistry. I just
When
added
you,
that correction.
no, I know, but I'm
The
just
only
curious.
chemistry that matters is smell. It's true, it's the only one you cannot undo. You can be completely turned on visually by someone and a year later have zero response. But you cannot change smell. If you don't like the smell, you won't be able to be with the person.
Does it go the other way? If you do like the smell, it'll work forever?
No. Sorry.
But haven't you read, has anyone here read Jeffrey Eugenides' The Marriage Plot? Yeah. Right, so this is like the key plot point in The Marriage Plot, which is this guy has been pining for this girl forever. They're both literary theory heads at Brown, talk about all the same novels, blah, 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 and they finally hook up and he's like, I don't like the way she smells. And it's done. It's done. So I just want to understand how like the young people in this room talk about chemistry or something. I've never felt so old before in my life.
And what's chemistry on that?
Grace, can you say more about that?
Sure. Well, as someone who doesn't go home with the bartender, no judgment, not my style. I would say that I guess mentioned more in the context of like a relationship that's right out. Okay, so maybe I'm practice with the bartender. Maybe we do go home good.
Everybody will leave with the smell thing tonight.
And then we have these fundamental differences. Whatever, he works the night shift, I have this job. His wounds matches mine. I'm avoidant. He's anxious attachment. But we have this chemistry. So I keep on pursuing him, and when all my friends say, why are you still with the bartender? I say, but we have this chemistry. So I think that's my definition
But
as I'm
it's meant
asking the
to say
question.
what? The unexplainable, the ephemeral, the attraction, the intangible. What does it refer to? I mean, it's a word that is a code word.
Yeah.
So it's a code for what?
Maybe lust? Like, or is it more than lust?
Yeah, I think it's like elevated lust. I think that it often in our culture, it's actually used to like, just like leapfrog you, or this kind of relates to like, oh, the true love or like love, like 10 out of 11. It like leapfrogs you further along in the relationship. And you don't have to say, oh, but we went on these like dates to the Met or whatever. Like it jumps you past the more mundane stuff into like, oh, we have chemistry, so we're here.
It promises, I think it's a promise of something.
Yeah.
There's something in the connection that intimates something else to come. And it might just be sex. But there's more in the interaction that can be contained in the interaction.
That's a very good.
And I think it's also
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I want home. Oh, we have chemistry, so like there's that potential.
But it's less than
I want home. Oh, we have chemistry, so like there's that potential.
But it's less than love, right? For my girlfriends, chemistry is a code word, right? For my girlfriends, chemistry is a code word for elevated lust. Because otherwise they would say that, I don't know, I'm just feeling something. They wouldn't use the word. Chemistry is a slutty word. It doesn't sense.
Here's the piece about chemistry, right? I love what you said. I think it stands a little. But there is also the thing that chemistry means I'm swept away. I don't control it. And it's spontaneous. It's autonomous. And it plays completely into the myth of sex as unprompted, spontaneous. It just happens. It takes me. And that is the thing that clashes completely with the question about long-term sex. You know, if you want it to just happen in a long-term relationship, it already has.
I think this also relates to what we were talking about earlier with Stendhal, who is like talks about the twig that gets thrown in the mine, it gets covered in, pull it out, and it's all crystallized, and that's like dazzled by this person, like whether it's chemistry or whatever it is, but you know, he's like, we're just so overwhelmed that we don't see the other person's flaws, at least in the beginning, and that takes time, and slowly the sparkle wears off. I think we had a question. Yes, go for it.
My question relates to that. So this is maybe a little bit different, but it comes from sort of me looking at my own relationship, which is almost 7 years in, and like my friends who are trying to, single and trying to find their person, and they sort of, some of them sit down and have this laundry list of traits. And I think back to what you were saying earlier about having reasons, right? And they're like, well, I love the person who checks all these boxes. And I look at my own relationship and like reflect back and look at it now, and like, yes, checked, but the things I care about today were never on the list, right? They're, dynamics between like how we treat each other when we fight, or, ways in which he's there for me when I've had a bad day, or like things like that you can't vet on a first date. You certainly can't vet on an app, like on a profile. And I find myself kind of caught in this context. Like friends come to me and they're telling me about their relationship woes, and I'm like, do we have to filter with this chemistry and this just kind of intuition rather than the laundry list of reasons? And is that what I should advise them to do, or is that kind of saying you let go and you leave yourself in the hands of this sort of uncontrollable thing that is all-consuming and could lead you astray? But also, like the thing I want to say is like, take time travel into the future, and based on that,
Yeah, Nietzsche said we should all, lovers should all have glasses that they can put on so they'll see their lover in 20 years and then make a decision about whether to have a relationship with them. This also reminds me of the question between rationality and passion that, of course, comes up a lot in Symposium. Agnes, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess I think think Esther will be better to speak to this question, but I feel like I just have a kind of faith that you're doing more than you realize you're doing in those early. Really good at faces. Humans are good at faces. Like we're good at recognizing. We recognize the tiniest little movements on a face, and I think we're good at back and forth interaction in a way that we have no idea how good we are. We learned on Zoom how good we are in real life because that tiny delay, it's all ruined. And I once read like this kind of sociology treatment of like the speed of conversation back and forth, and 1 second. And so if I say something and you respond in some way in 1 second, that is an uncomfortable pause. So you're responding within fractions of a second, right? And my brain can tally that and is like, how did she respond in a fraction of a second? Okay, so there's all this complicated stuff that's going on, and then you're first talking to this person, you're like, he has the same hobbies as me and checks my boxes and whatever, that's what's going on the surface. But I feel like on the other level, there's another thing happening. Checking for compatibility is checking things like, how is it going to be when I come home and I had a bad day? But I want to know, is this just a fantasy of mine that we are able to do this in these conversations, or is this truth?
I think that I can't just answer it like this, but there's something happening this is why I borrowed the concept of emotional capitalism. It's like going with a shopping list. And many first dates in app era is like a job interview. It's actually quite dreadful. It's very unimaginative. And very few people actually tell you a lot of thoughts about that thing itself. But I think that maybe a distinction that is useful, that I find useful anyway, is sometimes I distinguish between love stories and life stories. So there are many more people you can love than people you can make a life with. That doesn't mean that you don't love the person you make a life with, but it means that the ingredients are very different. You can have a love story, a beautiful interlude somewhere with somebody. You don't need to bring them into your world, you're in theirs. Think about all the questions about the everyday life that come afterwards. When you start to think about the things I like to do, the things that you're talking about are the life stories. The way we support each other, the way we back each other, the way we take care of certain things so that the other person can go ahead and do what they need to do, the way we respond to each other's parents, the way we are dealing with the troubled brother on the other side, that are part of life. And you can love somebody and not be able to handle one of these 50 things. But the life story demands that it's more about values, it's more about the dealing with the world outside of the relationship. It's not just the internal experience, but the external experience. It's all of that.
Also, your friends aren't telling you those stories because they want your advice.
Sometimes they're like, what should I do?
Well, I think people often tell their friends stories because they want to tell a story. They want to see themselves in a particular way, and they want to be able to narrate. They want to edit. And I say this in part because one of the other books I'm working on is called Fighting, and it's 3 major fights that my husband and I have gotten into. First is called Salami Pasta. Second is called He Does Exist. It's about Santa Claus. And the third is called Sabotage. And I think about how I tell those fight stories to my friends. I call them up and I tell them those stories because I want to tell a story. I want to be a particular kind of narrator. I want to create a certain mood and adopt a certain tone. And the best thing my friends can do is say, that's a good line, or that's funny, or you're missing that beat. They don't need your advice.
Great. Yeah, next to you. Last question.
I hope it's a good one. I often think about whether the issues related to love are just part of like the universal human condition, always existed and will always exist, or if we're actually facing new problems. I guess this question is open to anyone on the panel. it would be interesting to hear from all of your points of views because you have different perspectives. But yeah, you touched earlier a bit about how like this generation, every generation kind of has new questions to contend with. So like safe sex, and then now polyamory maybe. Is it like, are all of these issues just universal? They'll always exist. We can boil them down all to like a few things, or are there actually new things that we're learning about ourselves as human beings because of technology or whatever we're dealing with? And maybe specifically for Esther, have you noticed new problems that you're facing today that you haven't experienced like throughout your career that are unique? And does it differ by like different demographics, so like maybe gender or age or whatever?
Maybe I let other people talk first.
From the perspective of someone rooted in the ancient world, universality. So like 2,500 years ago, saw three problem areas: love, death, and politics. That is how we manage love, specifically romantic love, how we deal with our own deaths, and then like how we manage politics. And I would say that's still where we are. Those are still problem areas. We've not solved any of those things. But problem area is kind of broad. So the particular way in which that problem is going to manifest itself in his world, it was like fundamentally a homosexual manifestation. It was pederasty. It was like that was love, and that's how it's explored in the symposium. And so I think that the problem area, I guess, like just it seems to me it takes a different shape and different facets of it, I'd say.
To approach it from my angle, I see it often as a talent, and different eras call for different talents, right? There were eras not long ago when people were supposed to ballroom dance. And if you were in certain class, if you loved certain classes, then from age 10, your mom would be like walking you around in the room with the books on your head, and you were supposed to ballroom dance. And there were people who were really good at it. They only really found out because it was a requirement. But everybody was better than not trying to ballroom dance. And I feel like it's the same with romantic love. We live in an era where you're supposed to have a talent at it. Some people were born for it, and it's amazing. But probably we're all a little bit better at romantic love by the demands of the time.
The first thing I thought of when you asked that question was that I'm just tremendously interested in how new articulations of gender and sexuality have complicated some of the things that we've been talking about. Love, and I think as the spectrum of possible self-definitions and definitions or directions of attraction change, that has to change something in the way that we conceive of relationship between ourselves and the sexual or ourselves and the social. And I don't have an answer to that, but to me, that's the most noticeable thing when you look at the kind of trajectory of writing about love and desire from the ancients to the present.
One of the first thing I thought about was the questions we're asking are quite similar to what they were thousands of years ago. You know, how should we love? How should we get along with other people? What do we owe other people? And certainly in terms of love, you know, the structures of society are shifting, always shifting. I mean, you know, especially with women over the last 50 or more years, feminism, and you know, I hope we're evolving in a good direction that's allowing people to be, you know, acknowledging more human rights and acknowledging people, like how we should treat each other, whether it's community and respecting one another and treating women and people of color as equal to white men. So I hope we're getting better. And I think, you know, sometimes I get asked the question, would you want to live, when would you want to live in all of history if you could? And I'm like, I would want to live now, especially given who I am. And yeah, so I guess that's a very hopeful answer. It's, yeah, long trajectory.
So it's interesting that you've talked a lot about the two halves that come together, But we could also talked about Rilke, and who looks at coupledom as actually a way of helping us to live our solitude, and rather than to blur it. It's like, but this probably is it's not part of the human condition, but it's part of the age-old narrative. Some of the stories of love are about how to preserve the individual, and some of the stories of love are about how to merge. And they've always gone in two directions. And the same thing I said early on when I said it's about connection and separateness. So it's this pull of these two forces is where all the stories pretty much reside. But that said, I think that if you look at some of the main functions, cultural functions of religion, how to deal with the unintelligible, the unexplainable, what you do with suffering and pain, not how you avoid it because you can't, but how you live it, and what do you do with evil and the questions of morality, that structure continues. That said, I would say that in the 40 years that I am practicing, there are a ton of different changes. The meaning of marriage has changed, the duration of marriage has changed, the expectations people bring to marriage. Sex used to be in order to have 10 kids, for which you needed to have 12. Because two were not going to make it. It was primarily for procreation. It was a woman's marital duty. Sex that is for connection and pleasure. And after 2 kids, there is no other reason to have it, except if you feel like it. That's a whole new story. So sex that is rooted in desire versus duty. Monogamy used to be one person for life. Monogamy is one person at a time. People easily that they're monogamous in all their relationships, plural, as if it's an obvious thing. People came to marriage in order to have sex. Now they come to marriage and stop having sex with others. Fatherhood was basically a material provider. Fatherhood has become no less of an emotional experience. Children used to provide work. Now children provide meaning. Children used to be an economic asset. Now they're an economic drain. I mean, if you go down marriage, intimacy, children, sex, gender, we separate sex from reproduction. Then we separated reproduction from sex. Now we're separating gender from anatomy. These are huge revolutions, cultural, scientific revolutions. So, you married and you basically were stuck. That was it, one time for life. And if you didn't like it, you could always opt for an early death of your partner. Now you can do it again and again. You can do it for the first time when you're 60. I mean, this is a lot of, the first time a couple came in with a sexual issue and they were in their 70s, I looked, I was like, you still, now it's like 80 is easy. I mean, it's very rich in that sense. When you put it like that, you kind of want to be in this era. Same-sex couples, gay families. I mean, since when can you get 2 fathers to just raise children? Mothers could have done it and hide about it, but there are a lot of real liberations that have taken place, and they're not done. But this all happened in a very short amount of time. A long time is the same stuff, and then this all happens.
Okay.
I want to ask, there's something I've been wanting to ask the audience. So there's a distinction that you brought up at the very beginning, that some people fear losing the other and some people fear losing themselves. And I'm just more. Okay. So I want us to do like a poll.
Yeah.
Okay. So think about it. Which one are you? Do you more fear losing the other? Raise your hand. $17, $18. Okay. Do you more fear losing yourself? Raise your hand.
This is unbearable. I'm counting.
Okay, 30. So
I don't think this is trustworthy. For the record.
can you keep on that? That's all I wanted.